A small insect less than 3 millimeters long has, in less than 2 centuries, become the world's most invasive species, traveling from the jungles of South America to the world's major landmasses. Thanks to humans, Argentine ants have now become the dominant ant species in California, driving out dozens of native species. Oddly, there seems nothing special about this small ant that has colonized most of the world in just a century. As an entomologist observed, the workers are cheap and featureless. They don't have a thick armor or extensive spines like other species. They are pretty flimsy. So how did they conquer the world? The Argentine ant, Linepithema humile, isn't your typical ant with one queen and many workers laboring in a single nest. Argentine ants have multiple queens per colony, and there can be as many as 300 queens for every 1,000 workers, making them virtually impossible to kill with poison bait traps. When you have a lot of queens, that's not an effective strategy. Argentine ants are unusual in another way also. They don't build one large nest with lots of tunnels and rooms. Instead, they live in constantly shifting networks of temporary, shallow nests that change from day to day. Their ability to move quickly in large groups is why they're able to pack up their eggs and flee when necessary. Queens and workers are used to moving from nest to nest, rarely staying put for long. In their homeland, in South America, Argentine ants live normal lives in small colonies in northern Argentina centered around trees. Though they can eat virtually anything, Argentine ants like to cultivate aphids and scale insects, milking these leaf eaters for their sugary honeydew. Entomologists have observed wars between colonies in their native ranges. Like typical ants, different colonies fight each other and maintain relatively small territories, keeping their populations in check. But everything changed in the 19th century when they began their accidental journey in human shipping lines across the Atlantic. The ubiquitous cargo ships sailing from Argentina became the ants' luxurious cruise lines. Visualize the tiny vacationers sipping miniature piña coladas in their Hawaiian shirts. Genetic evidence supports the idea that the ants made their way from Port Rosario in Argentina to all across the globe. By 1880, they had established their first foreign base in the Madeira Islands, one of Portugal's busiest trading hubs in the Atlantic. From there, the invasion exploded across the globe. Wherever humans traveled, Argentine ants hitched a ride. The first recorded sightings of the ants in the United States was in New Orleans in 1904, and subsequent sightings show that they then hitched rides to California via cargo shipping routes, particularly the Sunset Limited, a train running between New Orleans and Los Angeles. Trucks then transported them throughout the state, and there started one of the greatest invasions in history. The invasion timeline reads like a horror movie. 1894, Porto, Portugal. The first large-scale recorded outbreak was after the exhibition of the islands and colonies of Portugal. The ants were suspected to have been traveling with the ornamental plants. 1900. Belfast finds a dark ant army invading homes and covering legs of mutton. 1904. New Orleans faces an ant plague so bad, the U.S. Bureau of Entomology dispatches field agents to investigate reports of the ants entering hospitals and, quote, busily carrying away the sputum, unquote, from tuberculosis patients. 1907. French Riviera villas had to be abandoned and a children's hospital was evacuated due to ants. 1927. Italy's King Emmanuel and Prime Minister Mussolini declared war on ants, setting out elaborate measures to be taken against the Argentine ants. Its failure is shown in the short story The Argentine Ant in 1952 by Italo Calvino, one of Italy's great post-war writers. Ultimately, some success came with pest control with broad-spectrum chemicals, most now banned to set up barriers or fumigate nests. Nowadays, these insecticides can be effective for clearing relatively small areas. This has proved useful in orchards and vineyards and in places such as the Galapagos Islands or Hawaii, where the ants threaten rare species. In the Galapagos, ants prey on tortoise hatchlings and bird chicks, threatening their survival. In California, the tiny Argentine ant has replaced the larger native species that once formed the diet of horned lizards, leaving the reptiles starving. It seems they do not recognize the much smaller invader as food. Large-scale eradications have failed, and while a few places have tried, New Zealand, the world's leader in controlling invasive species, is the only country to have prevented the spread of fire ant and Argentine ant by eradicating nests arriving at airports and ports. The country is also home to a spaniel trained to sniff out Argentine ant nests. With modern global shipping, the ants can reach any point on Earth in a few days. They're the ultimate hitchhikers, turning our global trade networks into their personal transportation system. As we discussed in our first video, Argentine ants become unicolonial when they travel great distances from their original nests, creating massive supercolonies that can span the entire globe. Today, these supercolonies stretch across continents, 3,800 miles along Europe's Mediterranean coast, 560 miles of California coastline, major populations in Japan, Australia, and New Zealand, even remote islands like St. Helena and Easter Island. Despite their name, Argentine ants have now lived in the United States for more than 120 ant generations. It's been a struggle. The environment in North America is dramatically different from their original tropical ecosystem. These ants had to become an urban species to survive, living almost exclusively in cities and agricultural areas where plumbing and irrigation provide the water they desperately need. Entirely thanks to humans, Argentine ants have now become the dominant ant species in California cities, driving out dozens of native species. But how do these tiny insects maintain such massive societies? How do millions of ants coordinate across such vast distances without fighting each other? The answer lies in their secret weapon, chemistry and genetics, which enable their sophisticated chemical communication system, providing them a global license or passport. While humans rely on sight and sound, ants live in a world of smell. But smell doesn't even begin to describe it. These insects are walking chemistry labs. Their bodies are covered in a waxy blend of compounds that serve as their identity card, passport, and family tree all in one. This chemical coating isn't just for waterproofing. It's the foundation of their entire society. Think of it as the world's most sophisticated social network. But instead of likes and shares, they're using chemical messages. Each ant produces these signals in specialized glands throughout their body, creating a complex vocabulary that includes food location alerts, danger warnings, colony membership verification, queen status updates, worker task assignments. But here's where it gets fascinating. Unlike most ant species that have one queen per nest, Argentine ants create multi-queen colonies. These queens mate inside their home burrows and sometimes leave on foot with a group of workers to establish a new nest colony. Scientists call this process budding. Imagine it as opening a new branch office complete with management and staff. Through this budding process, a network of allied and interconnected colonies begins to grow, all recognizing each other as family. This is a key factor in the growth of supercolonies. In their homeland in Argentina, different colonies maintain distinct chemical signatures, fighting with neighboring colonies like typical ants. But something extraordinary happens when they invade new territories. Through a process called genetic drift, invasive populations develop nearly identical genetic and chemical signatures. The proof? Scientists have tested this by bringing ants together from colonies separated by entire oceans. Instead of fighting, they cooperate perfectly. It's like having a global license and passport that grants access to the world's largest family reunion. This shared chemical identity allows workers from different colonies, from different continents, to recognize each other as family. An ant from California can be placed with ants in Europe and Japan, and they'll cooperate as if they were nestmates. They've created what scientists call supercolonies, massive networks of nests that all recognize each other as family. In their native Argentina, colonies might span a few hundred meters, but in invaded territories, without natural enemies carrying different chemical signatures, these supercolonies can grow to incredible sizes, thousands of miles across continents. But what happens when colonies with different chemical signatures meet? When two supercolonies with different passwords encounter each other? That's where things get interesting and deadly. Join us next time as we witness the greatest ant war ever recorded, where millions die in battles that never end. Thanks for joining me on this journey through an ant universe. If you enjoyed this exploration of one of Earth's most successful creatures, don't forget to like and subscribe for more fascinating stories about our natural world.